Racism doesn't exist here. Anti-Black racism is real. Unconscious bias is real. And systemic discrimination is real, and they happen here in Canada. Over the weekend, we saw thousands of people gather across the country to join peaceful protests against anti-Black racism. By standing together and denouncing the few who would try to derail these demonstrations, Canadians are sending the message that they will never tolerate injustice. To young Black Canadians, I hear you when you say you are anxious and angry, when you say that this brings back painful experiences of racism that you've faced. I want you to know that I'm listening and that your government will always stand with you. Together, we will keep taking meaningful action to fight racism and discrimination in every form. The status quo, where people face violence because of the color of their skin, is unacceptable. No parent should have to once again explain to their kids that they or their friends might face racism. It is time, it is past time for this to change. As leaders and allies, we must do the hard work needed to listen and learn. We must ensure that everyone is safe and respected. That includes journalists who need to be able to do their work on the front lines to expose the truth and tell the stories we need to hear. And we must, as Canadians, always keep working together to build a fairer, better, more equitable country for all.
For far too many Canadians, what's happening on the other side of the border are familiar scenes. Anti-Black racism, systemic discrimination, injustice exists in Canada as well. Over the weekend, we saw thousands of people protesting peacefully against racism. By banding together and by condemning those who are trying to stir up these protests, Canadians are sending out the message that they will not tolerate injustice. I would like to speak to young Black Canadians. I hear you. I hear your concerns, your anger, and your grief. I hear you when you say that this reminds you of painful experiences that you've gone through with regards to racism and discrimination. We are listening to you, and our government is there for you. We are acting to fight against racism and hatred in all its forms. The status quo where youth face violence and racism because of the color of their skin is unacceptable. No parent should have to explain once again to their children or their children's friends that they can be the victims of racism. As leaders and allies, we have to make sure that everyone is safe and that everyone is treated with respect. This includes journalists. They must be able to do their work to expose the truth and to tell these stories that we need to hear. And as Canadians, we need to continue to build a better and more equal country for all.
It has been a very difficult spring for many people. And although the path forward won't be easy, things will get better. Over the last month, we've started to see promising signs that the curve is flattening in Canada. Now, the situation remains very serious, but the more we can control the spread of the virus, the more we can begin restarting. In many parts of the country, this is already happening. In others, where the situation remains more uncertain, steps are being taken more slowly. Every province and territory will have its own approach. But as we move forward with restarting the economy, we must keep working together. On Thursday, as part of our weekly call, I spoke to the premiers about collaboration on the path ahead. I'm working closely with them, just like with mayors and other leaders, on what this approach should include. because there are a whole range of issues that will require us to take action together. As I've said before, to keep Canadians safe, to give businesses the confidence to reopen their doors and people the confidence to walk through those doors, we need to cooperate on countrywide testing and contact tracing. And on this front, we're making good progress. At the same time, our government is ready to be a partner for the provinces and territories in supporting vulnerable people, securing personal protective equipment, and working on childcare, to name a few. In other words, we're ready to be a partner in a safe, effective restart of the economy. And today, we're demonstrating a first step forward with support for municipalities as they face a cash crunch. From testing clinics to programs for seniors, cities and towns provide essential services. So it's crucial that they have the resources they need. In response to COVID-19, we will make available $2.2 billion for municipalities in the coming weeks through their yearly federal support with the Gas Tax Fund. Normally, municipalities receive these payments in 2 installments, but we know that cities and towns need this money right away as they deal with COVID-19. That's why we're making the full 2020-21 payment available now. Minister McKenna has sent letters to all of her provincial and territorial counterparts to outline how this accelerated process will work. But here's the bottom line. This is strong support to keep Canadians safe and our communities strong. And it's support that will give businesses the confidence to reopen, getting hardworking Canadians back on the job. This is a start. We know there's more to be done to support municipalities and to support the entire reopening process. In the days and weeks to come, we'll keep working with the provinces and territories on this and on a whole range of other measures. Plus que jamais, il va falloir travailler ensemble.
More than ever, we need to work together to restart the economy. Our government will continue to work together with partners to overcome this crisis, especially with regards to contact tracing. We are also prepared to partner with the provinces and territories to protect vulnerable people, obtain more personal protective equipment, and to look at issues such as childcare. We are ready to work together to ensure a safe and effective restart of the economy. This is why, today, we are making one first step forward. We're providing support to municipalities that are experiencing a cash crunch. Today, I announced that we will provide $2.2 billion for municipalities over the next few weeks through the yearly annual funding from the federal government. Normally, municipalities receive 2 installments. This is money that they need now in order to continue to provide essential services. We will make one sole payment for 2020 and 2021 now. Minister McKenna sent out letters to her counterparts to explain this accelerated process, and this is what we need to know. This investment is being made so that the municipalities can continue to ensure the security and safety of Canadians. This will help businesses to open up and for people, hardworking Canadians, to get back on the job. We're also looking at other ways to support the essential work done by cities and municipalities throughout the country. There's a lot that remains to be done so that our communities are able to start up their activities, that our businesses be able to open up their doors, and to put people back to work. I know that together we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll go to the phone for some questions. One question, one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. With regards to the protests, you said that the status quo is not acceptable. What do you see as a possible solution to this challenge? In Montreal, last night, there were protests as well. Are you scared that the situation will deteriorate? I think that Canadians recognize that there's a lot of work that remains to be done to fight against racism, even today. to ensure that everyone, our children, our families, feel safe and respected. Even in Canada, this is not only something that's happening elsewhere. Over the past 5 years, our government has invested in different ways to help community organizations to invest in Statistics Canada so that they can obtain better data in order to shape a Canadian strategy against racism. We know that there remains a lot to be done, and we will continue to do more hand in hand with the communities that are most affected by racism and discrimination. We need to be allies with these communities and for all Canadians. With regards to those who infiltrated these protests and broke things. We do have the right to protest peacefully in Canada. It's really important, as Mayor Plante of Montreal indicated, and we have to continue.
We need to do better in Canada. We need to continue to know that even though we have made strides forward in the fight against racism and discrimination, racism still exists in Canada. Anti-Black racism, systemic discrimination, unconscious bias are lived realities every day for millions of Canadians. We need to stand beside them. We need to be allies. We need to work in our daily lives to counter discrimination, racism, and intolerance. As a government, we've made many investments over the past 5 years, whether it's on community programs run by racialized communities, whether it's on Statistics Canada doing a better job at collecting disaggregated data, whether it's investments in anti-Black racism strategies or anti-racism strategies in general. But there is always more to do, and ultimately, we need to do it together as Canadians and be better allies. As for those who took advantage of these peaceful protests to do significant damage to communities and stores, as we saw in Montreal, we have to condemn those actions strongly. They do not represent the peaceful protesters who are standing up for very real issues in Canada. We need to continue to make sure that peaceful protest is always able to happen in Canada.
Une suivi, Ray?
Au sujet de l'argent pour les municipalités maintenant, c'est pas de l'argent neuf.
Now, for municipal funding, this is not new money. It's accelerated. It's an accelerated process. They're asking for $6 billion to fund direct services that have to be provided to the population. Will they be provided with this extra money so that they don't have to increase their property tax? Yes, we have an accelerated process. This money was going to be provided in 6 months in any case. We recognize that cities have a need right now with regards to cash flow. We do have to do more, and we will do more. But to do more, we have to work jointly with the provinces. Municipalities are a provincial jurisdiction. We will invest, but we have to be respectful of different fields of jurisdiction.
Just an initial measure that brings forward money that the cities were going to get 6 months from now anyway, but there is a need right now for liquidity, for support as they deal with this COVID crisis. But yes, we need to do more, and we will do more. But doing more needs to happen hand in hand with the provinces who have jurisdiction over the municipalities. But I can assure you, in my conversations with the premiers and in our conversations going forward, the federal government will be there to work with the provinces to support the towns and cities that we all live in.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Janice Dixon, the Globe and Mail. Line open.
Hi, Prime Minister. I'm wondering, when will your government mandate the collection of race-based data in connection to COVID-19 specifically and more broadly across Canadian society?
We invested millions of dollars over the past years so that Statistics Canada can do a better job of collecting disaggregated data. It is extremely important to be able to see the clearer details on who is most vulnerable, who is being affected by various things in society. So that's something that we know, and it's traditionally been something difficult to do. So we are moving forward on that. In regards to COVID-19 data, we've been working with the provinces from the beginning to try and get better granularity, better details around the data. Whether it's as simple as age and gender or much more complex data, we need to pull that together, and a data strategy has been part of what we've been talking on with the provinces, because we need to be able to compare what's happening in one province to what's happening next, and making sure that we're all collecting data the same way and in as much detail as possible is going to be an important part of the path forward. Okay.
For several years now, we've been investing in disaggregated data to better recognize differences in diversity within the data, to better respond to the challenges that many communities have to face. At the same time, with regards to COVID-19, for several weeks now, we've been working with provinces to shape a strategy on data collection to be able to compare data from different parts of the country. With the Canadians beginning to travel once again, this will be important. Also, we need greater information of communities that might be more affected by COVID-19.
Yes, and on the G7 meeting, Donald Trump has said it will be postponed to the fall. Are you planning on attending, and do you support the U.S. proposal to expand the group to include Russia?
We've always been working with the United States to coordinate when we can hold this important G7 meeting. It's really important to keep holding these meetings and making sure that we are coordinating internationally in this time of crisis. Russia was excluded from the G7 after it invaded Crimea a number of years ago, and its continued disrespect and flaunting of international rules and norms is why it remains outside of the G7 and will continue to remain out. C'est important d'avoir des occasions pour se rassembler.
It's important to have opportunities to meet as leaders of different countries to speak to the healthcare crisis and also the economic crisis. We need to work together, and we'll continue to work jointly with the Americans on the different details linked to the G7 meeting. Russia was excluded from the G7 because of the invasion of Ukraine. Russia continues to completely disregard international laws and standards with regards to Ukraine. It would not be acceptable for Russia to participate in a G7 meeting at this time. Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. With regards to municipal aid, you're talking about $2.2 billion, but the FCM asked for 10. Why is it taking so much time to find a solution for municipalities?
We respect
the jurisdictions as laid out in our Constitution. We are working with the provinces in order to find ways to help municipalities. Even if it's not our jurisdiction, we do have funding to help municipalities. We are sending money right now. It's not enough. More funding will be required. We hear the municipalities plea, and we're working with the provinces. We hope that the provinces will be good partners for the municipalities and the federal government. What are the requests being made by the provinces? What type of funding could be provided? What are the different options? We will discuss with the provinces as to the best ways to help municipalities. We know that there are many large municipalities that are having many issues with regards to transit. They're going to have to add more trains, more buses to the network. so that people can keep social distancing. More people will begin taking the buses, and a lot of people stop taking the bus and the subway because of COVID-19. So they do have a shortfall. We're going to work on all these issues together.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Jim Bronskill, the Canadian Press. Line open. Mr. Bronskill.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've already touched on this, but a month ago, municipalities said transit revenues had dropped drastically, draining their coffers. Basic services such as policing and garbage collection are at risk. Why is this taking so long to remedy?
We have been a great partner to municipalities as best as we could over the past years in various situations, in various crises, including through the gas tax transfer. We know how important our cities and towns are to the success of Canadians, to the success of our country's economy. That's why we are working with the provinces on figuring out ways that municipalities can be helped. We respect the Constitution that says that it is to provinces to manage and fund municipalities. But at the same time, we've looked for ways where we can make direct contributions to the municipalities, including through the gas tax transfer. That is something that we've moved forward today, so we can give more money more quickly to the cities, but we need to do more, and on that we will continue to work with the provinces and encourage the provinces to step up in helping cities.
A follow-up, Jim?
In Canada, the legacy of racism against Indigenous peoples weighs heavily, as you know. Now the pandemic has delayed federal responses to important recommendations in that area. Is there a danger that some of these federal responses will simply slip away given other pressures and priorities now?
No relationship is more important to my government than the one with Indigenous peoples. We have taken significant steps towards reconciliation over these past 5 years, but there is much more to do. We are working in partnership with Indigenous leadership, with Indigenous communities, with Indigenous peoples across this country. Right now, in this challenge around COVID, many of our partner organizations are very much focused on supporting their communities. We continue to work on the strategy to fight gender-based violence and respond to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry. But the work is affected because of COVID-19. But it remains a priority, not just for us, but for all Canadians, that we will continue to work on.
Good morning, sir. Ryan Tunnelty, National Post. You've acknowledged this morning that the money you're giving to municipalities is effectively in advance. It falls well short of their needs. We're seeing cities cut transit service. We're seeing them lay people off. I'm wondering if you're concerned that going forward we're going to have less services in cities, especially for low-income people who need it to get to work at grocery stores and long-term care centers.
I'm very concerned about the funding level for cities, about the services that cities offer to people, to Canadians, the essential services, whether it's obviously police and fire, but also frontline community workers, daycare workers, community center assistants, health workers. There's a range of services offered by cities that are at danger of disappearing. That's why we are doing what we can unilaterally in advancing the money forward, but we need to work with the provinces on this. Cities are the responsibility of the provinces. The federal government will be there to work with the provinces, to support, to help flow money, but the provinces need to step up as well, and that's what we're discussing right now. Okay.
We know that there is great concern with regards to municipal services provided to Canadians. There's not just police and fire services, but also daycare, community services, a presence on the field of those who help the most vulnerable. Oftentimes, these cities have to provide services, and now they threaten to be cut. This is one way to provide funding, but in order to send more money, we will have to work jointly with the provinces, and we will do that. We need for provinces to be there with us to help municipalities.
This morning, in the answer, did provincial premiers on your call last Thursday object to the notion of you giving money directly to cities?
We have always respected the Constitution in this country. I think premiers and the federal government have always understood we can work together on lots of areas that cross across jurisdictions, and we will always do that in a respectful way, working in partnership for the Canadians who, regardless of the order of government, we all collectively serve.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. You're speaking of the provinces. Could you help us to understand what's holding things up? Are the provinces dragging their feet? Could you be more specific? Are they afraid that some conditions will be imposed? For a month and a half now, cities have been waiting. We're going to continue to work with the provinces. Different provinces are facing different challenges with regards to COVID-19. They have different perspectives with regards to federal intervention. We respect provincial jurisdiction. We will be there. We understand that the federal government has a bit more fiscal maneuver power than the provinces, and so we recognize the importance of helping to ensure a safe reopening of our economy by the cities and the municipalities, and we will do that. If we look at the tension in the U.S., we see that intervention by President Trump have only fueled the fire. He's not at all making public statements trying to calm the situation down. Do you fear that this will only inflame the situation more? In your eyes, what should a leader do when a situation like this happens? I'm not going to speak on behalf of other countries. In Canada, we need to unite. Canadian leaders, whether they be municipal, provincial, or federal leaders, need to be there, need to listen, to hear, and to understand that despite the fact that we have made progress over the past few years and decades, there remains a lot of work to be done. We need to be allies for minority communities and racialized communities, and we will be there for them. It's my responsibility as Prime Minister to make sure that all Canadians work together.
You're talking to Black Canadians today. You've apologized for this many times, but you did wear blackface as a younger man. Do you think that in any way diminishes your ability to provide moral leadership on this issue, or do you still think you're carrying that baggage?
I think we all have a role to play. We've all seen things in our lives or done things in our lives that we need to learn from and do significantly better from. I have spoken many times about how deeply I regret my actions that hurt many, many people. But at the same time, we need to focus on doing better every single day, regardless of what we did or hadn't done in our past. We need to work together through this. We need to keep standing up for each other. We need to be there to say that every day we can do better as a country, as a world. And I will be part of that. I will continue to be an ally to minority communities, to racialized communities across this country and around the world. Nous devons de tous chercher à contribuer.
We all need to contribute in a positive way. I do regret the choices that I made a long time ago. I apologized to those that were hurt by my actions. Every day, we have to try to improve our situation and ourselves. That's what I'm doing. That's what the government is doing. We're trying to create a better world for our children and our grandchildren.
Putin is invited to this meeting. Will you take part?
There are still many discussions to be had on what, where, how this meeting is going to go on. We look forward to opportunities to gather together with various world leaders. The G20 is a forum in which we regularly have exchanges with across various countries that we don't necessarily have great relations with. But the G7 has always been a place for frank conversations amongst allies and friends who share so much, and that's certainly what I'm hoping to continue to see.
Brian Mullen, Global News. Prime Minister, a follow-up on collecting national data about how COVID-19 is impacting people along socio-demographic lines. Do you have an idea when this national data might be available, and explain how significant social determinants like race are on a person's vulnerability during this outbreak?
Well, I think to use a very clear example, on the closing in on 100,000 cases of COVID we've had in this country to date, we don't even have age data for a large portion of that. Certainly in the early days, collection of data was done in a very disparate way across the country, and collating all that data while people were trying to scramble to ramp up to respond to this crisis was extremely difficult. We need to do much better than that, and that's why we're working together with the provinces to establish a strategy on data collecting that will look at disaggregated data. We'll do a better way of bringing together data that can be compared and collated across jurisdictions, so we have a better picture of what's going on. These are things that we need to know, because we do know that COVID doesn't hit everyone the same way. Obviously, age ranges are real, but racialized communities are living this very differently than others. People who are already vulnerable for different reasons can become more vulnerable to COVID-19. That's why having accurate pictures of how people are being affected by this, and therefore how we can and should help them, is going to be really important for going forward. Depuis les tout débuts,
Since the beginning, public health agencies have worked very hard to try to respond to this crisis. In the beginning, it was very difficult to have detailed data. People were trying to respond to the situation immediately. For example, for all the cases of COVID that we have in the country, we don't know what age groups the people are in many cases. And so this would be something that seems simple to collect. Now, for more complex data, more diverse data, we need to coordinate as a government between different levels of government to make sure that our data can be compared to better understand who is most affected. Minority communities, vulnerable communities are harder hit by COVID-19. We know this on an anecdotal basis, but we need to have concrete data to better understand the situation and to better help.
CTV National News. Prime Minister, today you've talked about the potential of more financial help or other assistance for municipalities in addition to today's announcement. But I'm wondering, why not just bring forward some of those suggestions now? There are many mayors that are very preoccupied with the future of their fiscal situation. They're considering cutting essential services. Why not deliver them some certainty today with these other announcements you're teasing for later in the week or next week?
Because further announcements will require cooperation and partnership with the provinces who have jurisdiction over municipal funding. We need to work with the provinces on this, which is something we are doing and have been doing for a number of days now. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Hello again, Peter Van Dusen watching along with you. The Prime Minister has announced financial help for Canadian municipalities hard hit.
Free of fear and with a fair chance to succeed. Comme il recommence à faire beau, on est across the country, even in areas that are larger, further away from large cities. So it's important to be careful and not to contribute to new cases. Please continue to wash your hands and stay 2 meters away from others. And if you cannot distance from others, please wear a mask. If you're feeling unwell, please stay home and contact public health if you have symptoms, even if they're mild. Officials are working at all levels of government together to lift restrictions as safely as possible. The Public Health Agency of Canada continues to publish guidelines in collaboration with chief public health officials in provinces and territories. And the objective is to make sure that we are mitigating the risk of increased transmission due to lifting of some measures and monitoring closely the impacts of these changes. As measures are lifted, we need to make sure that the changes that are coming are not going to affect the disease activity in the regions. And as these changes are happening, I want to stress how important it is to remind ourselves that our actions today will have consequences on what a possible second wave of infection could look like. It feels scary and liberating right now, but we all have to remain watchful and continue to protect one another. From Canadians working from home to business owners closing shop or going online, we have seen people take extraordinary actions and make extraordinary sacrifices. So we can't lose the progress that we have made together. We cannot lower our guard. Things are getting better, but our families and communities are depending on us to keep working together to protect each other. Now I will turn to Dr. Tam, and then Dr. New, and then Minister McKenna. Dr. Tam.
Bonjour, good afternoon. I'll start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 91,351 confirmed cases, including 7,305 deaths, and 49,235 cases, or 54%, have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 1,691,000 people for COVID-19 to date, with about 5% of these testing positive overall. Over the past week, we have been testing an average of close to 29,000 people daily. While everyone in Canada is working hard in the fight against COVID-19, there is an increasing concern about a range of unintended consequences of the pandemic response, including for populations already experiencing marginalization due to stigma and other forms of discrimination. Among these unintended consequences is the impact on the ongoing public health crisis of opioid-related overdose deaths and problematic substance use in Canada more broadly. Last week, the British Columbia Coroner's Service reported that unintentional illicit drug toxicity deaths have increased in recent months, with over 100 reported deaths in the province, both in March and April 2020. This is a worrying trend, and it has been over a year since British Columbia observed numbers this high, sustained over a 2-month period. There have also been spikes in opioid-related overdoses in Toronto and Calgary, and several jurisdictions, including Nova Scotia, Toronto, and Guelph, Ontario, have reported overdoses due to unknown or unusual mixes of toxic illicit substances. As it remains vital to keep up public health measures to protect all Canadians from COVID-19, we must find ways to maintain life-saving supports, including treatment and harm reduction services for loved ones and members of our communities who use drugs. Changes in the illegal drug supply in the wake of COVID-19 may result in increased risk of overdose for persons who use drugs. We know that using drugs alone is a major risk factor for experiencing a fatal overdose. This is why it is so important never to use drugs alone. Always have someone nearby or connected virtually to someone who can monitor you and be ready to call 911 or your local emergency helpline if needed. It is encouraging to see community organizations and governments across the country coming together to address the dual public health crises of COVID-19 and drug overdose deaths. Harm reduction and treatment facilities are implementing infection controls and ramping up virtual and mobile services. The Government of Canada's Wellness Together portal provides wellness and substance use resources free to all Canadians. British Columbia's LifeGuard app will automatically contact 911 if you don't click in within 75 seconds of taking a drug. Stella Circle in Newfoundland and Labrador is providing clients with technology and Wi-Fi to access online tools. Other organizations are providing adequate housing, meals, and improving access to medications for substance use disorders to minimize drug-related harms and the impacts of COVID-19. It is efforts like these that will help minimize the inequitable and disproportionate effect of the pandemic on an already vulnerable group of Canadians. Together, we can reduce drug-related harms while keeping up with the essential public health measures to reduce the impact of COVID-19. Thank you. Merci.
Bonjour. Je vais commencer par vous donner
Good afternoon. I'll start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 91,351 confirmed cases, including 7,305 deaths and 49,335 people recovered, 54% of cases. Laboratories across Canada have tested over 1,691,373 people for COVID-19 to date, with about 5% of these testing positive overall. Over the past week, we have been testing an average of 29,000 people daily. While everyone in Canada is working hard in the fight against COVID-19, there is an increasing concern about the range of unintended consequences of the pandemic response, including for populations already experiencing marginalization due to stigma and other forms of discrimination. Among these unintended consequences is the impact on the ongoing public health crisis of opioid-related overdose deaths and problematic substance use in Canada more broadly. Last week, the British Columbia Coroner Service reported that unintentional illicit drug toxicity deaths have increased in recent months, with over 100 reported deaths in the province in both March and April 2020. This is a worrying trend, as it has been over a year since British Columbia observed numbers this high sustained over a 2-month period. There have also been spikes in opioid-related overdoses in Toronto and Calgary, and several jurisdictions, including Nova Scotia, Toronto, and Guelph, Ontario have reported overdoses due to unknown and unusual mixes of toxic illicit substances. As it remains vital to keep up public health measures to protect all Canadians from COVID-19, we must find ways to maintain life-saving support, including treatment and harm reduction services for loved ones and members of our communities who use drugs. Changes in the illegal drug supply in the wake of COVID-19 may result in increased risk of overdose for persons who use drugs. We know that using drugs alone is a major risk factor for experiencing a fatal overdose. This is why it is so important never to use drugs alone. Always have someone nearby or connect virtually to someone who can monitor you and be ready to call 911 or your local emergency helpline if needed. It is encouraging to see community organizations and orders of government across the country coming together to address the dual public health crisis of COVID-19 and drug overdose deaths. Harm reduction and treatment facilities are implementing infection controls and ramping up virtual and mobile services. The Government of Canada's Wellness Together portal provides wellness and substance use resources free to all Canadians. British Columbia's Lifeguard app will automatically contact 911 if you don't click in within 75 seconds of taking a drug. Stella Circle in Newfoundland and Labrador is providing clients with technology and Wi-Fi to access online tools. Other organizations are providing adequate housing, meals, and improving access to medications for substance use disorders to minimize drug-related harms and the impact of COVID-19. It is efforts like these that will help minimize the inequitable and disproportionate effects of the pandemic on an already vulnerable group of Canadians. Together, we can reduce drug-related harms while keeping up with essential public health measures to reduce the impact of COVID-19.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to start by reiterating Minister Hadji's comments. We're watching hundreds of thousands or millions marching around the world and in Canada for human rights. Let's be clear. Canada is not immune to racism and discrimination. We all need to work together to call it out and to do better. The health and well-being of Canadians has been and will continue to be the top priority of our government. But this pandemic has affected a lot more than personal health. It also has affected our economy, which is why our government has been taking decisive action to support families, businesses, and communities, and it's why we're looking ahead to see what more can be done.
We can help by continuing developing infrastructure projects throughout the country. For example, electric buses, renewable energies, and water projects that will help create good jobs and help communities to get back on their feet.
Our government understands the challenging situation that cities or towns are in. I have spoken with mayors from across the country, and I've heard about their significant COVID-related financial pressures, in particular in relation to public transit. Our government is having important conversations with provinces and territories about this pressing issue. As the Prime Minister said earlier today, today's announcement is a start. We know that more help is needed from municipalities, but every voyage begins with the first step. To make sure cities and towns have the resources they need to get and keep infrastructure projects going, we're speeding up this year's funding delivered through the Federal Gas Tax Fund. Instead of delivering two payments, one in the summer and one later in the year, we're delivering the full 2020-2021 amount to communities this month. Our government recognizes the need to be flexible during this crisis. By getting this money out early, we are contributing to a safe restart, helping communities get back on their feet, supporting them to get more infrastructure built, like high-speed broadband, public transit, and wastewater, creating jobs, and building a stronger, cleaner, healthier, and more connected country.
For communities to have the resources they need to launch their economy and follow up projects, and as the Prime Minister announced this morning, we are accelerating this year's fund through the Gas Tax Fund. Instead of two installments, one in the summer and one later in the year, we will be providing the entire amount to municipalities in June. This is one step to help municipalities. The government recognizes the need for flexibility during this crisis. By quickly disbursing municipal funds, we are ensuring that there's a sure recovery, helping municipalities to get back on their feet, helping them create new infrastructure like broadband infrastructure, public transit, and wastewater treatment projects, helping them to create jobs and to create a more connected and
Each year,
stronger economy.
This federal fund provides $2.2 billion to cities and towns and First Nation communities and supports thousands of local infrastructure projects. Projects like the 1,550 solar panels installed in the district of Hudson's Hope in British Columbia, improvements to the Legacy Trail between Canmore and Banff, the rehabilitation of the Sid Buckwold Bridge in Saskatoon. Dollars from this fund are helping with pool upgrades in the St. James Civic Centre in Winnipeg and with stormwater management in Mississauga. Ces fonds ont permis d'électrifier.
These funds have helped to electrify buses in Laval and funded recharge stations in New Brunswick.
Funding can be used immediately by municipalities for priority projects. It can be banked for later use, pooled with other communities for shared infrastructure projects, or used to help finance big-ticket projects that can pay community dividends for decades to come. Alors que nous sommes confrontés aux plus grands défis
while we are facing the greatest health and social economic challenges in our country, more municipalities in the country will be able to take investment decisions to invest in the projects they need, investments that will help them strengthen municipalities during this pandemic and help build cleaner, healthier, stronger and more connected municipalities.
The accelerated federal gas tax fund payment is just one way we are showing flexibility in response to the pandemic, helping Canadians and their communities adapt and recover, get people working, and building a stronger, cleaner, healthier, and more connected country for the future. As the Prime Minister said this morning, this is a start. We know there's more to be done to support municipalities, so we'll keep working with the provinces and territories with more to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We will now start taking questions. As usual, we'll start on the phone, 3 questions, and then we'll turn to the room. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Our first question, notre première question is from Crystal Oak from Global News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Tam. Has any progress been made on gathering more detailed data, for example, about race or immigration status on people suffering from COVID-19? You've acknowledged that there are gaps in the data, but I'd like to ask what is being done to address those gaps.
Yes, that's an important question, and we have, on the general set of data, things have improved, and so we now have like 99% of the case report form from provinces and territories. Unfortunately, they don't currently contain the race and ethnicity information. So we're working really right now with Statistics Canada and other organizations like CIHI and the provinces and territories really actively to try and get some of that. Having said that, it would be no surprise to anyone just based on the information already available, not necessarily through this systematic data gathering, that those who are in certain more disadvantaged populations, socioeconomic areas of lower socioeconomic sort of levels, and certain groups of people in Canada are more vulnerable to the impact of COVID-19, and that's already evident.
Thank you. And for a follow-up, so how significant are these social determinants? I know you're saying that you're not having the data, but do you have a timeline on when we would get that data and how significant those would be?
So we are working with mainly Statistics Canada, for example, in looking at linkages and looking at trends to not just the COVID-19, but seeing what kind of data is available on the unintended consequences and the other data linkages. So I think that's actually really important. But as you've also seen from the more granular data provided now from areas like Toronto, we know in areas like Montreal, there are certain areas of even down to the local jurisdiction that are seeing disproportionate number of cases. Some of them are related to the work that people living in those areas are linked to, such as some of the workplaces that we've seen outbreaks in, but also crowded living conditions. So that data is coming out from more the local level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Marie Vassel avec Le Devoir. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, ma question est pour la
Question.
ministre McKenna.
Hello,
sur
my question is
l'annonce
for Minister
d'aujourd'hui.
McKenna on today's
J'aimerais savoir
announcement.
pour les
I would like to
fonds
know
taxe sur l'essence pour les municipalités.
the gas
Est-ce qu'il
tax
y aura
fund
une
for
exception
municipalities.
de
Will there
prévu?
be
Est-ce que les
an
villes vont
exception?
pouvoir dépenser
Will the
cet
cities
argent-là
be able to
sur
spend
autre
this
chose
money
que
on
les
anything
infrastructures
else
si elles le
besides
souhaitent?
infrastructure if they so
Alors,
will?
merci beaucoup pour
Answer.
la question.
Thank you very
Alors,
much
le
for the
fonds
question.
est pour aider
The fund
les coûts
is
capitaux
intended to
des
help
municipalités.
with
Ça veut
capital
pas dire
costs for
nécessairement qu'ils
municipalities.
doivent,
It does not necessarily
investir tous
mean
les fonds cette
that
année.
the entire
Ils
fund
peuvent,
should be invested this year.
tenir les fonds pour investir
They could keep
dans
the
des
funds
infrastructures, des grands
to
projets dans le
invest
futur.
in major
Ils peuvent
infrastructure
travailler avec
projects in
d'autres
the future. They could
municipalités,
work with
mais
other
c'est pas pour les
municipalities.
coûts opérationnels,
It's
c'est
not
pour
for
les coûts,
operational
de
costs,
capital.
it's for capital expenses.
Merci. Et sur un autre
Answer.
sujet, toujours en infrastructure, là, mais toujours
Supplementary
pour vous, Madame
question.
McKenna,
Still
on nous dit
on
qu'il y a
infrastructure,
des
and still for you,
négociations
Minister
entre la
McKenna,
province
we are
du
hearing
Québec et
that
votre
there are negotiations
ministère en
on
ce
the way
moment
between
pour
Quebec
voir s'il y
and
a
your
moyen
department to
d'accélérer
see if there are
les
ways of
dépenses en
speeding up
infrastructure et si Ottawa
infrastructure
peut offrir
spending
plus de
and to see if
flexibilité au Québec
Ottawa
pour utiliser
could
cet
offer
argent
Quebec
fédéral
more
plus
flexibility
rapidement
for the use
pour
of these
certains
federal
projets
funds
comme
more
des
quickly
écoles ou des
for some
hôpitaux.
projects
Est-ce que vous
like
pouvez nous dire
schools
où ça
and
en est
hospitals.
pour ces
Could you tell us
négociations-là avec le
what the
Québec?
state of
Est-ce
these
qu'il y a des
negotiations are with
développements ou
Quebec?
une entente?
Are there any developments?
Alors,
Is there
moi,
an
j'ai beaucoup de
agreement?
discussions
Answer.
avec mes homologues
I
tout
am
autour du pays.
having lots of
On les
discussions
écoute.
with my
Je pense,
counterparts
c'est
throughout
sûr
the country.
qu'on
We are
doit
hearing
avoir la
them.
flexibilité.
Certainly,
On doit
we need to
regarder
be
de
flexible.
quoi qu'est-ce qui
We
est
need to
nécessaire
find out
maintenant
what
et
is
dans le
necessary
futur, dans,
now and in
dans
the
le
future
domaine d'infrastructure,
in
c'est
the area
sûr.
of infrastructure, of
Alors,
course.
les discussions vont continuer.
Discussions
Quand j'ai
will
quelque chose
continue.
de rapporter, je vais
When
être là, mais c'est sûr,
there's something
je travaille
to
très
report,
bien,
I will be
avec
here
le
to
ministre
report. Of course, I'm working very well
Merci,
with
Madame la
Minister
Ministre.
Dubé.
Opérateur, prochaine question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Jim Bronsko, the Canadian Press. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Good morning. Will you commit to consulting with the Privacy Commissioner on any plan for a national contact tracing app?
Thank you very much. We know that privacy is of utmost importance to Canadians, and so the work is ongoing right now to look at a variety of different options that has privacy at the first and foremost consideration. As the Minister of Health, of course, having a digital contact tracing app would likely be helpful for some jurisdictions, but we also know that an enormous amount of contact tracing is happening in the old-fashioned way using human beings. In fact, some jurisdictions prefer it that way, and so we are continuing those conversations with our colleagues, and I know the Prime Minister himself is watching this development very carefully, as it is of utmost importance to him as well.
Jim, follow up.
How concerned are you about an uptick in the cases of COVID-19, spread of the coronavirus through the street protests that are unfolding now?
I'll answer generally, and then I'll turn to Dr. Tam for some practical protest advice. Listen, I think it's people's right to express their support and in some cases concern about things that are unfolding both here in our country and across the world. And we know that gathering together is a very powerful way to lend that support and to be an ally in many of these kinds of situations. There are ways to do it more safely. People still do need to keep physical distance, make sure that they bring with them hand sanitizer, for example, and I think bring a mask. There are situations change very quickly when you're in a crowd setting, and you may not be able to keep that physical distance from someone else. So I think although we've seen much more peaceful protests in general here in Canada, we still encourage people to be very careful when they're congregating in large crowds. as you recall, was one of the first things that many municipalities and provincial governments chose to limit was the size of crowds gathering, and there's a reason for that. It's much easier to come into contact with other people's droplets when you're close by. Dr. Tam, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that, as in any gatherings, follow your local public health advice, but doing it as safely as possible, I think, is the key from a health perspective. So I think, as the Minister said, try to maintain that physical distance, but one might sort of perceive that this could be difficult to maintain. So definitely wearing a mask, having hand sanitizers, or having access to hand washing will be very important. One thing that people may want to consider is that, of course, wearing a mask is important, but shouting and making really loud sort of projections can potentially increase the risk. And so, I might want to choose other means of showing or messaging, whether it's be signage or making noise using other instruments, for example. It's just to consider that shouting and that type of behavior can potentially project more droplets. But be considerate of others. I think people are out to protest, to support a common goal. So I think being respectful and kind to each other who is participating by wearing masks and doing the right public health measures, I think is really key. I do think that local public health will be monitoring very closely because I think process outdoors will have lower risk, but anything that's more in an enclosed environment with lots of people are the things that local public health will be most concerned about in terms of COVID-19 spread.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll now turn to the room. So, Mackenzie.
Hi, everyone. Mackenzie Gray, CTV News. I'd like to start with you, Minister Hajdu. In your answer about contact tracing to Jim's question earlier, you seemed to kind of bring up that municipalities and other agencies might be interested in sticking with the old-fashioned way. The Prime Minister a few weeks ago seemed very confident that it'd be a singular app that the government would basically tell people to download if they were feeling comfortable with that. Is that still the plan of the government?
I think whatever path that we choose to go forward with a digital app for contact tracing, it has to be an app that Canadians will feel comfortable using and that we can gain momentum with. One of the things that I think from a health perspective we're keeping our eye on is the usefulness of an app if there's not a high take-up. And actually the success of the apps require people to want to use them. And so we are right now having conversations with provinces and territories. There are, as you know, some apps being used in other provinces that provinces feel are very effective or becoming effective, if you will, in their own domain. And those are the conversations underway. But listen, everything we've done so far has been in collaboration with the provinces and territories. It's important to make sure that we have an approach that Canadians are comfortable with and that they will use.
My follow-up is from Minister McKenna on the gas tax announcement today. Basically, this seems like just a cash advance for many of the cities. They're going to be getting money that they would have received earlier. You talked to a number of mayors, Kennedy Stewart and Vancouver being one of them, saying, we need money now. We're going to have to lay people off. In Toronto, the TTC needs a lot of money to be able to continue to run. Why is the federal government giving money for infrastructure projects and not for operational costs like paying people to make sure they don't get laid off and keeping important services like public transit going?
So I've had many conversations with mayors across the country, and just today with Mayor Kennedy Stewart, as you said, as well as Mayor Tory, Mayor Watson. And this is the first step. The Prime Minister has been clear. We do need municipalities to go ahead with their planned infrastructure projects, and that includes in relation to public transit. But of course, we recognize that there are bigger challenges. I've certainly heard directly about the impacts of decline in revenue when it comes to public transportation, and we need to restart properly. We do need people to be able to take public transit, and people are taking it right now are essential workers, and they need to be able to do it in a safe way. So we are having these conversations. that we do need to be working with provinces. Provinces have prime responsibility for operating costs, and we're having those conversations right now. I've had conversations with my provincial counterparts, and I certainly, like our government, was heartened to see Premier Ford say he recognizes that the provinces will need to step up, and we're certainly working with them. But we recognize that we need to do more.
Thank you, Minister. I will now go back to the phone. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question is from Lena Dib avec la presse canadienne. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour
Question.
vous, Madame McKenna.
Hi, my question is for you, Mrs. McKenna. Why the delay to reach an agreement with the municipalities, knowing that they've been asking for 10 billion for the past 2 months? Why the delay in the negotiations? Answer. I think it's a very important measure. It's true, it's not everything. We want the municipalities to start with infrastructure projects planned. We are having lots of discussions. I'm talking with the mayors throughout the country. It's sure that they need help for operational costs, including public transit. It's very important that we have public transit now for essential workers to be able to go to work and for economy to reopen. But we are respecting jurisdictions. Municipalities fall under the provincial jurisdiction. We are not saying we are not going to help. We already took this important measure this morning. We hope that the provinces will step up and join us to help the municipalities that need help because of the COVID-19 situation. Follow-up question? I understood that. I'm trying to find out if you could provide details as to why you haven't reached an agreement with the provinces to help municipalities, to give them money for operational costs. Answer. I know that many discussions are underway between the Prime Minister, Minister Freeland, with the provinces and territories. I think every week they have discussions. They are continuing. And these are important discussions. As I said, we've not arrived at an agreement, but we do hope that some provinces will recognize the fact that we need to work together to help municipalities.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, one last question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Our last question is from Bill Curry with the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Thanks. For Minister McKenna, earlier this year you put out a report saying that the government had identified about 52,000 infrastructure projects and funded them, and yet the Parliamentary Budget Officer was at committee on Friday saying that he can only find 33,000 and he doesn't know where the missing 20,000 are. So can you explain that or address his concern?
Thanks for the question. Look, we've been working hard to invest in infrastructure, and this infrastructure is having a huge impact on lives across the country, whether it's investments in public transportation, in wastewater, and community and rec centers. These are really important initiatives. We have projects that the Auditor General spoke about, 33,000 that are through our infrastructure program. There are also projects that are through the gas tax that we're announcing today, and there are also projects through CMHC. That brings up to the total of projects, and we're going to continue moving forward. This announcement today is an example of how we see infrastructure is critical to the restart of the economy, but also in the longer term, it's about ensuring that we have a healthier, cleaner, and more connected country.
Bill, follow up.
And on today's announcement, you and the Prime Minister said that further promises are dependent on talks with the provinces. But just last year, the federal government, without the provinces, doubled the gas tax to $4.4 billion for that 1 year only. So why not just do something similar this time, increase the gas tax, which is something the federal government can do without the provinces?
Look, we're making not only today's announcement, but we've been investing in infrastructure with municipalities, and we've taken a whole range of measures already in the last few months to support Canadians, to support Canadian businesses, to support Canadian individuals, to support provinces, and we're going to continue to do that. But let's be clear, municipalities, and we've been told this by provinces, are creatures of the provinces. And so we really do need the provinces to work together. We certainly understand the significant challenges that are faced by cities and towns across the country, as I said, in particular with respect to lost revenues for public transit. And we're going to continue working with the provinces. I think a solution is there to be had. And as I say, I've seen, Premier Ford has been clear. He recognizes the need to step up. And I think this is where we need to show to Canadians that the federal government and the province can work together to support cities as we go forward.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. That's it for today. Thank you.
That's the end of today's press conference.